Hey, my name's Rocco, one of the co-founders of a company called Spruce, working primarily on identity and data, specifically things with identity around authentication, so how do you access a service, and identity around credentialing. So basically anything with an issuer, a holder, and a verifier model where someone issues a credential to someone as a fact about them, and that person's able to verify that fact with someone who's requesting that, and be able to phone home. And the data side of data portability, where users are able to kind of have their own personal data cubby that they bring with them to applications and services, and are able to basically authorize access to that when requested. So Eric?
All right. My name is Eric Tang. I'm the co-founder and CTO of LivePeer. LivePeer is building the world's open video infrastructure, and coincidentally, that's also built as the video streaming technology layer for Web3. So similar to Filecoin providing data storage for Web3, Ethereum providing smart contract for Web3, LivePeer provides video streaming for Web3.
And I was about to say, on the topic of decentralized social media, come on up. Hey. On the topic of decentralized social media, there's a number of factors to consider when approaching it. And a lot of things that come up first is kind of the current model of centralized social media is broken in a couple of ways. Namely, how data is handled by large corporations, how your identity is not portable, and kind of where everything is stored at the end of the day and how it's processed. And I think one of the things with the space recently has been we're going to kind of build decentralized social media. Everyone's going to come in, own their own identifiers, own their content, kind of take it back. One of the things I definitely want to talk about, specifically when it comes to decentralized social media, is the social element that's often not talked about of arbitration and management of these platforms that are kind of emerging in the space. One of the things you'll commonly see is platforms have problems with moderation, where you have large centralized entities have thousands of people responsible for actual content moderation. So if very vicious things, illegal things kind of come up on the platform, there's some removal process. And namely, there's controversy around that too. But I think we have the bones, which we'll talk about too, where we have the technology to make this happen. How do we handle that kind of social part of moderation and arbitration when it comes to future of decentralized social media? And I'd love to, you guys talk about this.
Getting right to the hard question.
Yeah, let's do it.
Maybe before we dive in.
I was about to say, Tegan, introduce yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Tegan Klein. I'm the co-founder of Edge and Node. We work on the Graph protocol, so one of the core developers within the Graph's ecosystem. And we're really excited about making all data open and public and verifiable. Yeah, so back to you for the hard question.
All right, content moderation. Content moderation is I think one of those Achilles heels for social networks in general, and it's actually one of the reasons many social networks failed. All these successful social networks all have spent lots of resources to build human-powered content moderation tools. So I think there's definitely technical solutions that can help with scaling up the human moderation, but at the end of the day, the moderation has to be done via human efforts because it's going to be a subjective point of view, and that kind of touches on the concept of DAOs and all these other rules that need to exist in these decentralized social networks where the rules may be not so well defined, and it's really defined by a group or by a community.
Yeah, and I think the protocol needs to be neutral, but then what you can have on top of that is moderation. And you could even create a moderation protocol. If anyone's working on that, please let me know. I'm very interested. But you could envision having different levels of moderation, right? So you have maybe I'm a little bit more liberal, and so I'm okay seeing certain content. And then other people will say I only want to see rainbows and butterflies, a little bit more conservative on what they want to see. And each level can have its own kind of governing principles around it. And so I think moderation is very important. But I do think it needs to happen in a fair and a decentralized way. And I think we do need to learn from Web 2 around the failures of censorship, right? You censor 5 people that are really bad, but then where does the line go? Where is that line drawn? And then you eventually end up with very few people left on the platform. And so I think that's a really dangerous risk or path to go down.
And I was going to say too with that, and one of the things that's specifically around that moderation side is I'm wondering if we're going to see the rise again of TCRs, or token curated registries. So back in like 2018, 2019, one of the things that was all the rage was token curated registries, where if we gave some group of token holders something to curate. So if you could think of like the Princeton Review's top 100 colleges, but imagine it was like a group of token holders that did that. That was kind of the idea, where we'd possibly curate objective information, but honestly, all the original experiments ended up seeing the lines that's, more subjective things were really what was more effectively curated. Do you think that the incentive models for these networks are less so on kind of the creator tokens or like these kind of like influencer tokens, but rather the token models be more centered around these kinds of curations of content, of what's allowed on certain platforms, these kind of moderation schemes, et cetera? So I'd love to chat about that more too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, within the graph, we're actually working on something within Edge and Node. And I think reputation is really important, right? And we have curation within the graph ecosystem when it comes to subgraphs, which are kind of a proxy for applications. And so people have band together in the community to decide like which subgraphs, like for example, the live pair subgraph, like I want to curate on that. And so they band together and said, okay, I've done due diligence. I know that this is the real live peer team, that one's not, right? Because you have permissionless subgraphs. Anyone can name it whatever you want. So I think curation is very important. And I think within curation, you have a reputation component, right? And so if Coinbase is saying, okay, I curate on this subgraph, well, I trust Coinbase in their due diligence. And so individuals can kind of follow on to people that they respect in the space. And I think it's a huge component of this.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think the reason this scheme is still better than the centralized component is because at the end of the day, there's still checks and balances in play where you don't necessarily always have one group that's in charge of the giving of the creation of the reputation, right? That can kind of come from multiple groups. And the other thing that I would say is tooling is really, really crucial in this moderation topic, because oftentimes these social networks fail not because they don't want to get rid of bad actors. Everybody wants to get rid of bad actors. It's because they literally just cannot do it technically because there's too much traffic, too many things going on the network, and they don't have a mechanism to actually get rid of this thing that's harming their network. Yeah. In the same way, in a decentralized world, I think applications that are building in this space should really be thinking about the tools that are needed. So, for example, in video streaming, it's pretty well known that if you start a live streaming platform, the first thing that you're going to see is people trying to stream illegal soccer. Right, that just happens, and there's no way to stop them. People just find a way to do it. So you have to have a way to automatically detect the types of content that you don't want on your platform and flag them, or allow people to self-select, or allow the community to come to a conclusion that this is actually illegal content, and we will censor this type of content.
And speaking of like the technology side, I'd love if each of you can dive more into how live peer and the graph become a core part of these emerging social networks, specifically on the video side and live streaming side, and also on indexing side, and how that data is being processed. So yeah, if either of you just love to dive more into the technology and how that powers all of this.
Yeah, I think this is like a tech stack, right? Like we are all kind of building a part of that tech stack, right? Like identity is a really important part of it, and indexing data is another part of it. In terms of video, which I can speak to, the kind of the evolution of social networks on the internet has generally been content format evolving over time to a primarily video-centric format. You can see that Reddit is a good example. At the very beginning, it was just discussion forums. Over time, they discovered, well, people actually engage way more with video posts that are on Reddit. Now, Reddit is launching their own video networks, right? Very similar to how Facebook saw, the kind of the content format quickly evolved towards video. And it's just difficult to enable video streaming at scale on the internet, period. So what we do a lot of the times is to use decentralization to really build a more scalable infrastructure, a more cost-effective infrastructure, so that all these new social networks can start to experiment and bootstrap their application with a small budget.
Yeah, and I think social media could potentially be one of the killer applications in Web3. And Web3 is a brand new platform for fully decentralized applications to live. So you have Web3 as the platform that we all trust, and then you have the protocols on top. And so the graph is one of those protocols. LivePeer is one of those protocols. LivePeer builds with the graph so that the organization of the data is done in a decentralized way using the graph. And so there are other core components of that Web3 stack, the other protocols like storage. So you have Arweave, you have IPFS. There are so many components of that tech stack that all need to, I think the pieces are there. They just need to all start talking to each other. And so that's why we just need time in the Web3 space. And then you'll have social media, but social media in Web3 will probably look very different than what social media looks like today. And we'll see brand new use cases that we can't even fathom today once with that tech stack is ready.
Yeah, and from our side, then, on Spruce, the identity side, it's basically how can a user, the platforms, need to run these decentralized infrastructure, and so too must the data be decentralized. And for users, a lot of that comes down to not only controlling their own identifiers as they go to all these platforms and not rely on any large third parties for their identifiers, but also have that consistency across experiences across these platforms. So retaining whatever identity information you have about yourself, whether that's a profile, whether that's like public information about you that you want to keep with you and bring with you to these sessions, and the data that follows, whether that's social graphs, whether that's your actual posts, whether that's your messaging on these platforms, and bringing that with you is a huge core component and part of all this. And going back to what you said earlier, that's one of the things I would definitely also want to talk about is what will this look like? Because a lot of social media right now, we have a lot of these generalized platforms. We have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have Reddit, which do have some forms of curation when it comes to groups and smaller subgroups. But do you think the emergence of decentralized social media will start almost from the ground up, where you have these small dedicated communities at first rather than large generalized platforms?
Absolutely, yeah, it's all about community. And I think how many of you are frustrated with all of the notifications you get on Telegram, on Twitter, on Slack? And that's because each of those tech stacks have so much redundancy in Web 2, but they are centralized. So you have to build that out. It wastes developer time, it wastes developer talent, and it's also a waste, right? And so if you have Web 3, where it's all a protocol that everyone uses, it's a public good, and you just have the UX and the UI on top, you get rid of all of that redundancy, and it's a much better world, right? Where you don't have 20 applications that do basically the same thing, but not everything.
Yeah, really good kind of comparison between the Web 2 and Web 3 dynamics. The other thing that I'm starting to see in this space, which is so new, right? I don't think we have seen a breakout application yet. But in this world, the incentives for these applications are very different. In the Web 2 world, it's all about the network effect, right? That's what you do to build a social network. And the downside of trying to optimize for the network effect is to also trying to stop your competitors' network effects, and that is a core strategy for all of these social networks, right? So what ends up happening is all of these social networks create just roadblocks or other things anything that they can do to make sure the users of their platform don't go to other platforms. Really good example for Twitch. In order to become a streaming partner on Twitch, which is to qualify to be able to make money on Twitch, you have to be exclusively only streaming on Twitch. If they catch you streaming the same stream on Twitch and on YouTube, then you're kicked out of that program, right? Then you as a streamer who makes a living, that is they got you, right? You cannot switch. But in Web3, data is by default open. And what that means is the same data, the same video, the same posts can actually exist in multiple applications, and it is almost incentivized and encouraged for that to happen because there's the incentive of developers, small teams being able to build pretty good applications that are all very specific to the different use cases, but being able to utilize the same underlying social networks, the same underlying NFTs that are being created. And we're starting to see that already, and it's pretty interesting.
Totally, yeah. We need to get rid of all those walled gardens. I'm tired of like SaaS contracts and salespeople like pushing you. It should all just be open and at your discretion, right? And I think the incentive piece is really important because think about TikTok, think about Twitter. Like the first people on those platforms, like those platforms are nothing without their users. And the users of those platforms, they didn't get anything. But with Uniswap, with ENS, the first users, they were rewarded for being there. And so I think that's really powerful.
And one of the things I wanted to touch on that we were just covering is these large platforms, right? One of the things I'm always curious about is some of them are kind of moving forward initiatives to decentralize their stack, like Twitter, for example, with Blue Sky. Is there really a future where the large tech giants will decentralize themselves? Will it end up kind of in some kind of government breakup with like, Facebook, now Meta, having 5 to 6 little smaller organizations that come from it in some kind of like crackdown, and then one of them becoming just the next Facebook? Is there really a path to decentralization for these larger tech giants, or is it really going to be this wave of new technologies and everything coming in, kind of changing the way we interact online?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be new, right? Like Facebook, Twitter, everyone getting into like quote unquote Web3. It's a nice validation to the space, but it's not what we're here for, right? We're here for brand new use cases. We're here to give the power back to the users. We're not here to like redo the same thing that they're doing with like JPEGs now. And I think it comes down to incentives, right? And so a lot of these Web2 companies, if they sell ads, they're incentivized to be very extracting of their users, right? They're incentivized to extract so that they can lock people in, they can sell ads to companies, and then they can sell those products to their users. And so I think it's going to be a fight, right? They're not going to want to give up that that business model. So I see a world where it's more of a fight, and then they'll eventually kind of come in and then live within protocols in a centralized way.
Yeah, I wonder which one of the social networks that we see today is most likely to go that route, right? I don't know if you have seen any examples of that. I think of like Reddit is probably the example in my head where each subreddit is actually its own community, and Reddit has gone through a period a couple years ago where there was a lot of talk about it actually decentralizing and each subreddit becoming its own organization. Like we didn't have the term DAO back in the day. DAO was a dirty term because of the DAO. Now it's not, but still, like I think Reddit kind of went up against that, and because of the corporate structure, because of the kind of the underlying incentives of the investors and the board and the people who were involved, ended up going the other way. I wonder if it was today when Web3 is actually in vogue, they would have made the other choice.
Totally, and I think that's a great point because when you're starting a business or a protocol, Reddit selling equity, right? Their incentives are then to make those equity holders wealthy. And so Reddit is about to IPO, right, in the next few years. And so even though the founders wanted to do something different, it's all about incentives. So if you're thinking about building in a decentralized space, don't build SaaS. Don't do equity and go like the token route if that is the route that you want to go towards.
Yeah, and even related to this with users, I think one of the last questions for this is specifically, when thinking about these platforms, which user bases, not necessarily which ones are willing to decentralize, but which user bases do you think will be the most attracted and of like the large social giants, just to kind of close this all out, to these new forms of platforms? Will it be Twitter's users because there's this critical mass of crypto people there? Will it be Reddit because subreddits can kind of find a new home on this kind of infrastructure? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think we already have a social network within Web3, which is like everybody here, right? Like we're all participating in Web3. Like each Web3 ecosystem is its own social network. Like we, at Life Here, we work with a lot of kind of emerging applications, and I'm starting to notice a trend where each blockchain ecosystem is creating its own social networks for its members to dog food. We're starting to see there's an interesting application called Discover that's in the ICP ecosystem. It's kind of like a decentralized version of Reddit. But if you go and see like the types of posts on Discover, it's basically the the ICP community forum, right? It's like people there posting about ICP stuff. They're they're doing their NFT sales, and it's like all like very ICP specific, and they have like 5-6 digit users like on a weekly active basis. So that's pretty good for a community, and I think from there like the organic community within Web3 can start dogfooding Web3 social networks, and I think that's kind of where it can start.
Yeah, I almost wonder if it will start with people that aren't necessarily Web3 native, because I think they have the most to kind of gain from these use cases. So I think actually it might be that takes hold first. But it comes down to network effects and solving problems, so yet to be determined.
Or why not both? Yeah, and thank you everyone for coming around, and yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.